John Miller looked out the viewport as the transport ship approached Nexus Station. The massive structure gleamed against the backdrop of stars, rings of light circling around a central sphere that housed the Galactic Confederation's Academy of Sciences. His heart beat faster. After 23 years on Earth, he was about to become the first human to study among the stars. "Approaching docking sequence," announced the ship's AI. "Please secure all personal items." John checked his duffel bag one last time. It contained everything he owned now: clothes, some books, a few mementos from home, and a data tablet loaded with every bit of scientific knowledge humanity had been willing to share. It didn't seem like much to represent his entire species. The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged. John took a deep breath and stood up. No human had ever set foot on Nexus Station before. The exchange program was brand new, established just months after humanity's first contact with the Confederation. Most people back home thought it was too soon to send someone, but John had jumped at the chance. The airlock door slid open with a soft hiss. Standing on the other side was the strangest being John had ever seen. It stood nearly 7 feet tall with blue-green skin that glistened with moisture. 4 arms extended from its torso, and a ridge of what looked like gills pulsed along its neck. "Welcome to Nexus Station, Human Miller," the being said, voice bubbling through a translator device. "I am Zerdek, your assigned liaison during orientation period." John stepped forward and smiled. "Please call me John. It's amazing to meet you." Zerdek blinked all 3 of its eyes in sequence. "Your enthusiasm is ... dotted. Follow me." "We must process your arrival." They walked through corridors filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, while others defied description. Beings made of light, crystalline structures that floated rather than walked, and creatures that seemed to shift between solid and gas. Students and teachers from over 500 worlds, all gathered to learn from each other. The Academy houses 53 different environmental zones, Zertek explained as they walked. "Your quarters are in Zone 12, which has been adjusted to Earth-standard gravity and atmosphere. You may experience mild discomfort in common areas, which maintain Confederation-standard conditions." John nodded, trying to take everything in at once. "When do classes start? What subjects will I study first? Will I get to meet students from many different worlds?" Zertek made a gurgling sound that John's translator couldn't interpret. "Your preliminary assessment begins tomorrow. The Education Board will evaluate your current knowledge and determine appropriate placement." "Great," John replied, stopping to watch a group of crystalline beings float past. They chimed melodically to each other in what must have been conversation. "I've been studying xenobiology and comparative physics non-stop since we received the curriculum materials." Zerdek's skin darkened to a deeper blue. "I should warn you, human. No species has ever passed the preliminary assessment on their first attempt. It is merely a formality to establish your baseline deficiencies." "There's a first time for everything," John said with a smile. They arrived at John's quarters. A simple room with furniture that adjusted to his specifications. A viewing screen covered one wall, showing the neutron star that Nexus Station orbited. The pulsing light created beautiful patterns across the room. "Rest now," Zertek said. "Assessment begins at first cycle tomorrow?" After the liaison left, John sat on the edge of his bed and opened his tablet. He had studied every piece of information Earth had received about Confederation sciences. The material was incredibly advanced, concepts that human scientists had barely begun to theorize about were treated as basic knowledge here. John knew the odds were against him, but he wasn't about to give up before he started. He spent hours reviewing the material until his eyes grew heavy. The stars outside his window spun slowly as the station rotated. Just before sleep took him, John wondered how many humans had looked up at the night sky and dreamed of this moment. Morning came with a soft chime from the room's communication system. "Human Miller, your assessment begins in 1 standard hour. Nutrition is available in your preparation chamber." John found what appeared to be breakfast waiting in a small alcove. a bowl of something that looked like blue oatmeal, and a cup of clear liquid. He sampled both cautiously. The oatmeal tasted surprisingly like cinnamon, while the drink reminded him of cucumber water. Not bad for alien food. Zerdak arrived precisely on time. Are you prepared, Human Miller? As ready as I'll ever be, John replied, straightening his collar. Earth had provided him with a simple uniform bearing the United Earth emblem, a blue circle with white outlines of the continents. The assessment chamber was enormous, shaped like an amphitheater with a central platform surrounded by 7 elevated seats. Each seat held a different alien species. The variety was astonishing. One examiner appeared to be made entirely of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves. Another was a small, rodent-like being with enormous eyes. The central figure was a gaunt humanoid with gray skin and 4 arms, each holding a different device. Human John Miller of Earth, announced the central examiner. You stand before the Education Board for a preliminary assessment. This evaluation will determine your placement within our institution, John nodded respectfully. I'm honored to be. Here, begin primary cognitive evaluation, the examiner said. What followed was unlike any test John had ever experienced. Questions came at him from all directions, sometimes multiple examiners asking different things simultaneously. Some questions were spoken, others projected directly into his mind, and one examiner communicated entirely through patterns of color that the translator converted to words. The questions ranged widely. Calculate the energy required to shift a quantum probability field. Describe the ethical implications of consciousness transfer between willing and unwilling hosts. Taste this gas and identify its molecular composition. John answered as best he could, sometimes drawing on earth science, other times working through problems from first principles. When faced with completely unfamiliar concepts, he asked clarifying questions and built his answers step by step. Hours passed and sweat beaded on his forehead as the questions grew increasingly complex. Finally, after what seemed like days but was actually 8 hours, the central examiner raised all 4 hands. Assessment complete. John stood on shaky legs, exhausted but relieved. How did I do? The examiners looked at each other, their expressions unreadable to human eyes. Without another word, they filed out of the chamber through a door that appeared in the wall behind them. Zerdak was waiting outside, skin now a pale blue color. The board is deliberating. This is unprecedented. They should have assigned you remedial studies immediately. Is that good or bad? John asked. It is unknown, Zerdak replied, all 3 eyes blinking rapidly. No new species has ever caused the board to deliberate after initial assessment. They always know exactly where to place newcomers. John smiled tiredly. Well, humans have a talent for the unexpected. As they walked back to his quarters, students from dozens of species stopped to stare at him. Word was spreading quickly through the station about the human who had somehow disrupted the normal assessment process. Rest now, Zertak said when they reached John's room. I will inform you when the board reaches a decision. Alone again? John collapsed onto his bed, mind racing despite his exhaustion. He had no idea if he'd done well or terribly, but one thing was certain. Humanity had made its first real impression on the galaxy, and nothing would be quite the same again. John woke to an urgent chiming from his room's communication system. He had slept for nearly 12 hours after the exhausting assessment. Human Miller, your presence is required immediately by the Education Board, announced the system. Your liaison is waiting outside your quarters. John quickly dressed and splashed water on his face. When he opened his door, Zerdak stood there with all 3 eyes wide open, skin shifting between blue and purple tones. What's happening? John asked. Unprecedented situation, Zertak replied, voice bubbling through the translator. The board has been in continuous session since your assessment. The entire station is talking about you. As they hurried through the corridors, John noticed other students and faculty members stopping to stare at him. Some pointed, others whispered to each other, and a few even followed at a distance. Did I do something wrong? John asked. Not wrong, different, Zerdik increased pace. The board cannot agree on your results. They arrived at a large door marked with symbols John couldn't read. The door slid open to reveal a chamber much smaller than the assessment room. The 7 examiners sat around a circular table, voices raised in what seemed to be heated debate. The human employs irregular cognitive patterns, exclaimed the examiner made of shifting geometric shapes. Its neural pathways do not follow standard developmental sequences. Its methodology violates standard epistemological frameworks, agreed the small rodent-like examiner. Yet it derived functional solutions to 78% of presented problems. The central examiner, the 4-armed gray humanoid, noticed John and gestured him forward. Human Miller, you have created a significant problem for this institution. John swallowed nervously. I'm sorry? Do not apologize, said another examiner whose body seemed to be composed entirely of swirling gas contained within a transparent membrane. This is a fascinating development. The central examiner folded 2 arms across its chest while the other 2 manipulated data displays. According to our standardized metrics, you have simultaneously failed and exceeded expectations in contradictory ways. John blinked in confusion. I don't understand. The rodent-like examiner climbed onto the table for better eye contact with John. Your species approaches problems using intuitive leaps and pattern recognition that our system cannot properly categorize. You lack fundamental knowledge in 93% of tested fields, yet you derived working solutions through methods our system cannot classify. In simpler terms, said the central examiner, you are both woefully uneducated and mysteriously effective. We cannot determine whether to fail you entirely or create an entirely new classification. John wasn't sure if he should feel insulted or proud. On Earth, we recognize many different types of intelligence and learning styles. Not everyone thinks the same way. This statement caused another uproar among the examiners. The geometric shape being rearranged itself rapidly in what John guessed was agitation. Different types of intelligence? This contradicts the universal cognitive development scale established over 8,000 years ago, it declared. Yet the human's results cannot be explained otherwise, countered the gaseous examiner. We must consider the possibility that our understanding is incomplete. The debate continued as if John wasn't present. He stood awkwardly until Zertik touched his shoulder with one damp hand. This has never happened before, Zertik whispered. The board has never questioned the assessment system itself. News of the controversy spread quickly through Nexus Station. By the next day, students from hundreds of species were finding excuses to pass by John's quarters or the study areas where he spent his time. Some brave ones even approached him with questions. A tall, insectoid being with compound eyes introduced itself as Clictic. Is it true that humans learn through intentional failure? It asked through its translator. In a way, John replied. We call it trial and error. We learn a lot from our mistakes. Clictic's antennae twitched. Fascinating. In my culture, errors are considered evidence of unfitness. Those who make mistakes are removed from educational paths. A group of spherical beings that communicated by changing colors joined the conversation. They were curious about human imagination and how John could propose solutions to problems he'd never encountered before. We often use analogies, John explained. We look for similarities between new problems and things we already understand. It's not always perfect, but it gives us a starting point. The aliens found this concept revolutionary. In their educational system, students were expected to master each concept completely before moving to the next. The idea of working with partial understanding was foreign to them. For 3 days, the education board remained in closed session. Zerdik informed John that several additional experts had been called in, including specialists in cognitive development and educational theory from across the Confederation. On the 4th morning, a formal message arrived. Human Miller is to report to Testing Chamber 3 at 2nd cycle today. Bring no materials. Come prepared to demonstrate human learning methodology. What does that mean? John asked Zerdik. I believe they wish to observe you solving problems, the liaison replied. They want to understand how you think. Testing Chamber 3 was smaller than the assessment room but equipped with various instruments and display screens. The entire education board waited inside, along with 3 new aliens John hadn't seen before. "Human Miller," began the central examiner, "we have reached an impasse. Your results cannot be properly evaluated under our current system. We require you to demonstrate your learning methodology," said one of the new aliens, a being with silvery skin and no visible eyes. "We have prepared 3 challenges considered impossible for your knowledge level." The first challenge appeared on a large screen, designing a functional ecosystem for a toxic gas giant. The second was a mathematical equation filled with symbols John didn't recognize. The third was described as a mediation between 2 species, with incompatible sensory systems. "You are not expected to solve these problems," the examiner explained. "We wish to observe your approach. Verbalize your thought process as you work." John started with the ecosystem challenge. He knew very little about gas giants, but Earth had extremophile organisms that lived in seemingly impossible conditions. "I'm thinking about creatures on Earth that live near volcanic vents in our oceans," he explained as he sketched ideas. "They survive using chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. Maybe something similar could work here?" As he worked through each challenge, John talked through his reasoning. He made guesses based on partial information. He proposed solutions he knew were probably wrong but might lead to better ideas. He drew parallels to things he understood and built from there. The examiners watched in silence, occasionally exchanging glances or making notes. After 3 hours, the central examiner raised a hand. "Sufficient data has been collected. Human Miller, you are dismissed until further notice." As John left with Zerdak, the liaison's skin had turned a bright orange color John had never seen before. "What does that color mean?" John asked. "Excitement," Zertak replied. "Something unprecedented is happening, Human Miller. The board is not just evaluating you now, they are evaluating themselves." 2 weeks passed with no word from the education board. John spent his time exploring Nexus Station and talking with alien students who sought him out. He became something of a celebrity, known throughout the station as the human who broke the system. John sat in the station's central garden area, a place where various plant species from across the galaxy grew together in carefully controlled conditions. Beside him was Clictic, the insectoid student who had become a regular companion. "I don't understand why they haven't made a decision yet," John said, watching a plant with blue leaves that seemed to follow movement like eyes. Clictic's antennae twitched. "The board has existed for 3,000 years without changing its methods. What you represent threatens the foundation of their authority." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," John sighed. "I just answered their questions the best I could." "That is precisely what troubles them," a new voice said. John looked up to see Zerdak approaching, skin a calm blue-green today. The liaison sat down on a bench designed to accommodate various body types. "The board has reached a decision," Zertak announced. "You are to appear before them tomorrow at first cycle." John felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "Will they send me back to Earth?" "Unknown," Zertak replied. "But there are rumors of significant changes coming." At night, John barely slept. He wondered if he had ruined humanity's chances for integration into the galactic community. What if his failure to fit into their system made them decide humans were too different to work with? Morning came, and John dressed carefully in his Earth uniform. Zerdak arrived to escort him to a chamber he hadn't seen before. It was smaller than the assessment room, but larger than the meeting room. With curved walls covered in shifting patterns of light, the 7 members of the education board sat in a semicircle. Behind them stood a group of aliens John didn't recognize, wearing elaborate outfits that suggested importance. "Human John Miller," the central examiner began. "After extensive deliberation, we have reached a conclusion regarding your assessment." John stood straight, trying to look confident. "You have failed by all traditional metrics," the examiner continued. "Your knowledge base is inadequate in 93% of tested fields." John's heart sank. "However," the examiner raised one hand, You have also demonstrated cognitive approaches that our system failed to recognize or value. This is not your failure, but ours, the rodent-like examiner stepped forward. For 12,000 years, the Confederation has educated species based on knowledge acquisition and pattern repetition. We have refined this system to perfection, or so we believed. Your species has revealed a critical flaw in our approach, said the examiner made of geometric shapes. We have been measuring only one type of intelligence while ignoring others. The central examiner gestured to the important-looking aliens standing behind the board. The High Council of Education has authorized a complete review of our methods. This has never happened before. John was stunned. All this because I took one test. Your test revealed that our perfect system is not perfect, explained the gaseous examiner. It showed us that we have been rejecting potential because it did not fit our narrow definition of intelligence. The central examiner stepped down from the platform and approached John. Up close, its gray skin had a subtle pattern that reminded John of circuit boards. We have a proposal for you, Human Miller. The board requires your assistance in developing new assessment protocols that can recognize and evaluate different types of intelligence. Me? John asked in surprise. But I'm not an education expert. Precisely, the examiner replied. You are outside our system. You can see what we cannot. Over the next few days, John found himself working alongside the most respected educators in the Confederation. They presented him with problems from various academic fields and asked him to explain his thought process as he approached them. John demonstrated how humans used imagination, analogy, and intuition alongside logical reasoning. He explained concepts like lateral thinking, creative problem-solving, and the value of making educated guesses. On Earth, we have a saying, thinking outside the box, John told them. It means looking at a problem from unusual angles instead of following standard procedures. The alien educators were fascinated by this concept. They had been teaching students to think inside the box for thousands of years, believing that strict adherence to established methods was the only path to knowledge. John worked with a team to design simple tests that could identify different thinking styles. One test asked students to find multiple uses for common objects. Another presented incomplete information and asked for reasonable guesses about the missing parts. A third test evaluated how well students could apply knowledge from one field to solve problems in another. The results were immediate and dramatic. Species that had always performed poorly on traditional assessments suddenly showed remarkable abilities in these new tests. Students who had been labeled as remedial demonstrated creative insights that amazed their teachers. Zerdek visited John in his new workspace, which was filled with diagrams and notes. The liaison's skin was a bright orange of excitement. Word has spread to other education centers across the Confederation, Zertek reported. Many are beginning to question their own methods. You have started something revolutionary, Human Miller. John smiled but shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just think like a human. That is precisely what makes it special, Zertek replied. For too long, the Confederation has valued only one path to knowledge. You have shown us that there are many. 1 month after his arrival at Nexus Station, John received a formal message from the High Council of Education. It informed him that a new position had been created, Special Advisor on Cognitive Diversity, and offered him the role. John accepted without hesitation. He sent a message back to Earth explaining the unexpected turn of events. He had come to learn from the advanced species of the galaxy, but instead, he was teaching them something fundamental about the nature of intelligence itself. The response from Earth's representatives was brief but pleased. Humanity's first diplomatic success. Continue the good work. As John looked out the viewport at the stars beyond Nexus Station, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. He had not just opened a door for humanity to join the galactic community, he had begun to change the community itself, making space for the unique way humans saw the universe. Not bad for failing a test, he whispered to himself with a smile. 3 months after John arrived at Nexus Station, The changes had spread throughout the Galactic Confederation's educational system. The new assessment protocols, officially named the Miller Cognitive Diversity Framework, were being implemented. At learning centers across hundreds of worlds, John sat in his new office, reviewing reports from various academies. Each report showed similar results. Students previously considered unsuitable for advanced studies were now flourishing under the new system. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Zyrtak, who had become John's official assistant. The quarterly meeting of regional education directors will begin soon, Zyrtak said, skin showing a professional shade of blue. They are eager to hear your assessment of the implementation progress. John nodded and gathered his notes. In just 3 months, he had gone from being the first human student at the academy to advising the highest educational authorities in the Confederation. It was still hard to believe. They walked through corridors that had become familiar to John. Students and faculty from various species greeted him with their cultural equivalents of respect bows, gesture patterns, color changes, and scent releases. I never expected to become famous for failing a test, John commented as they entered the large conference chamber. You did not fail, Zyrtak corrected. You revealed a failure in our system. There is a significant difference. The conference chamber held representatives from 57 different educational regions. Some attended in person, while others appeared as holographic projections. John recognized many of them from previous meetings, but some were new faces. The meeting began with formal greetings in the Confederation's diplomatic language. Then each representative reported on their region's progress implementing the new framework. In the Orion education sector, we have identified 322 students previously classified as remedial who now show exceptional aptitude under the new assessment protocols, reported a crystalline being whose body chimed softly as it spoke. The Sagittarius Academy of Applied Sciences has restructured its entire curriculum based on the Miller framework, said another representative, a being that resembled a floating jellyfish. Initial results show a 48% increase in problem-solving efficiency across all disciplines. When all the reports were complete, attention turned to John. The central table displayed a 3-dimensional map of the Confederation, with education centers marked in glowing points of light. Nearly 700 institutions had adopted the new system in just 3 months. Human Miller, said the lead director, a tall being with silver skin and eyes that shifted position on its face. Please share your assessment of our progress. John stood and looked around the room. The data is clear. The new framework is identifying talents and abilities that were previously overlooked, but implementation challenges remain. He pointed to several regions on the map where adoption was slower. Some of the oldest and most prestigious institutions are resistant to change. They see the new system as a threat to their traditions. The representatives nodded in understanding. Change was difficult, especially for institutions that had operated the same way for thousands of years. There is also the challenge of teacher training, John continued. Many instructors don't know how to nurture these different types of intelligence because they were never taught to recognize them. This was perhaps the biggest obstacle. The Confederation had perfected a system of education that worked in exactly one way. Teachers and professors knew how to guide students along that single path, but were often lost when students demonstrated different learning styles. We need to create training programs for educators, John suggested, and we need to identify students who excel under the new framework and invite them to become teachers themselves. The meeting continued for hours as they discussed strategies for expanding the new system. When it finally ended, John felt exhausted but satisfied. Real change was happening, and he was at the center of it. As he and Zyrtak walked back to his quarters, they passed the garden where students often gathered between classes. A group of young aliens from various species sat in a circle, engaged in animated discussion. What are they doing? John asked, pausing to watch. Zyrtak's skin shifted to a pleased purple color. They are participating in what they call a human-style discussion group. Instead of formal debate with strict rules, they are freely exchanging ideas and building on each other's thoughts. It has become quite popular, John smiled. It wasn't just the education system that was changing, the entire culture of learning was being transformed. Back in his quarters, John found a message waiting from Earth. It was from Dr. Linda Carter, the head of Earth's Educational Liaison Office. "Congratulations on your success, John," the message read. "Your work has impressed the Confederation authorities so much that they have approved our request to send 20 more human students to Nexus Station. They will arrive next month. They're counting on you to help them adjust." John felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. 20 more humans. He would no longer be the sole representative of his species. The next day, John met with Galactic and several other students who had become his friends. They gathered in a study room where John had set up a simulation of Earth environments. "More humans are coming to Nexus Station," John announced. "Excellent news." Galactic's antennae vibrated with excitement. "Will they think like you do?" John laughed. "Yes and no. Every human thinks differently. That's actually one of the points I've been trying to make. Even within a single species, there's enormous cognitive diversity." This concept fascinated his alien friends. In many of their societies, conformity of thought was valued over individuality. "We must prepare for their arrival," said a spherical being named Orb, who communicated through color patterns. "They will need guidance in navigating Confederation culture," John nodded. "And I'll need your help. There's so much about your various cultures that I'm still learning." They spent hours planning orientation programs for the new human arrivals. John was touched by how enthusiastic his friends were. Just a few months ago, he had been an alien. Curiosity. Now he was helping build bridges between worlds. Later that evening, John received another message, this one from the High Council of Education. They requested his presence at a formal ceremony to mark the official adoption of the Miller Framework as the Confederation standard. As John prepared for bed, he looked out at the stars visible from his viewport. Somewhere out there, 20 humans were preparing for their journey to Nexus Station. They had no idea they would be arriving not as struggling students in an alien system, but as valued representatives of a cognitive approach that was transforming galactic education. "Not bad for a species that's only been in space for a few decades," John whispered to the stars. 1 year after John Miller arrived at Nexus Station, the Galactic Confederation held a grand ceremony to celebrate the complete implementation of the Miller Framework. Representatives from over 2,000 worlds gathered in the enormous central chamber of the station. The space was filled with beings of all shapes, sizes, and compositions, a true display of the diversity. The new educational system now celebrated. John stood on the main platform alongside the 7 original members of the Education Board who had first assessed him. He wore a new uniform, specially designed for the occasion, bearing both Earth's emblem and the symbol of the Confederation's Educational Council. "I feel nervous," John whispered to Zerdek, who stood beside him as his official liaison and now close friend. "Understandable," Zerdek replied, skin cycling through a pattern that indicated pride. Few beings ever witnessed the results of such profound change in their lifetime. The central speaker of the Confederation, a tall being whose crystalline body refracted light in beautiful patterns, approached the communication podium. The chamber fell silent. "We gather today to mark a transformation in our understanding of knowledge and learning," the speaker began, voice resonating through translator devices across the chamber. "For 12,000 years, the Confederation believed it had perfected the science of education. We were wrong." A murmur passed through the crowd. 1 year ago, a representative from a newly contacted species arrived at this station. By our traditional metrics, this being failed our assessment comprehensively. Yet in that failure, we discovered something remarkable, a blindness in our own perception. The speaker gestured toward John. "Human John Miller showed us that intelligence takes many forms, that creativity and intuition are as valuable as memorization and procedure, that the unexpected solution may sometimes be the best one." John stood a little straighter as thousands of alien eyes focused on him. The Miller Cognitive Diversity Framework has been implemented across all Confederation learning centers. The speaker continued. The results have exceeded our most optimistic projections. Holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing data from hundreds of academic institutions. The statistics were impressive: a 42% increase in scientific innovations, a 67% improvement in cross-disciplinary problem solving, and most importantly, an 89% reduction in students labeled as unsuitable for advanced education. We were discarding minds that did not fit our narrow understanding of intelligence, the speaker said. Now we see the true cost of that error. John was invited to speak next. He had prepared carefully, knowing his words would be recorded in the Confederation's historical archives. I came to Nexus Station expecting to learn from you, John began, looking out at the vast assembly. Instead, we learn from each other. That's how the best education works, not as a one-way transfer of knowledge, but as an exchange of perspectives. He spoke about Earth's history of education, how humans had struggled with similar challenges, valuing certain types of intelligence over others, forcing diverse minds to conform to rigid systems. He explained how humanity had slowly recognized these errors and worked to correct them. The Confederation accomplished in 1 year what took my species centuries, John said. That's the advantage of your long history. Once you decide to change, you can implement that change with remarkable efficiency. After the ceremony, John joined a reception with the human delegation that had arrived 3 months earlier. The 20 students had adapted well to life on Nexus Station, each finding their own path within the new educational framework. Some excelled in sciences, others in diplomatic relations or cultural studies, but all benefited from a system that now valued their uniquely human approaches to learning. The next group arrives next week, said Alex Peterson, a young physicist who had become the unofficial leader of the human students. 50 more humans from different fields. The Earth Council is calling this the greatest educational exchange in human history, John nodded. And it all started with a failed test. You didn't fail, Alex corrected with a smile. You broke the curve. Later that evening, John returned to his quarters to find a special communication waiting. It was from the highest authority in the Confederation, the Grand Council itself. John read it with growing amazement. The message informed him that the Council had created a new position, Ambassador of Educational Exchange, and wanted John to be the first to hold this title. The role would involve traveling to various worlds across the Confederation to help implement the new framework and serve as a bridge between human and alien educational systems. John sat on his bed, stunned by how far things had come. Just over a year ago, he had been a graduate student on Earth, applying for what seemed like an impossible opportunity. Now he was being offered a position that would shape the educational future of thousands of worlds. A soft chime indicated another visitor. John opened his door to find Zertik along with Kliktik and several other alien friends. We heard about your appointment, Zertik said, skin glowing a bright orange of celebration. We came to congratulate you. And to say goodbye, added Kliktik, antennae drooping slightly. You will be leaving Nexus Station soon. Not goodbye, John corrected. I'll be back often. And besides, we're all connected now. What we started here will continue to grow. They spent the evening sharing stories and making plans. The aliens described the changes they had witnessed in their own learning environments. Teachers who had once been rigid and procedural were now encouraging questions and creative approaches. Students who had been silent for years were now active participants in discussions. In my home world, said Orb, the spherical being who communicated through color patterns, they have created a new word in our language. The closest translation in your tongue would be to think like a human. It means to approach a problem from unexpected angles. John laughed. On Earth, we might say to think outside the box, yes, or pulsed a pattern of agreement. But now, we understand what that truly means. As his friends eventually departed, John stood at his viewport watching the stars. Tomorrow he would begin preparing for his new role. There would be challenges ahead. Not all worlds would welcome change, and bridging the gap between human and alien thought would never be simple, but something profound had started here. A recognition across species that diversity of thought was not a problem to be solved, but a resource to be treasured. From a simple assessment that he had technically failed, John had helped spark a revolution that would continue long after his lifetime. "Not bad for my first job out of graduate school," John whispered to himself with a smile. Beyond the viewport, the neutron star at the center of Nexus Station pulsed steadily, its light reaching out to touch 1,000 worlds that were now beginning to see the universe through new eyes.